Why care about the sensuousness of words? In our age of polluted air and water, habitat loss, deforestation, species extinction, global climate destabilization, and a host of other humanly caused environmental crises, why on this damaged earth should we spend any quiet, contemplative time writing and reading poems, let alone reading a literary critic's analytical prose about them? The answer lies in the power of these activities to nudge consciousness to a more ecologically ethical state, which in turn shapes behavior. A poet crafts language that, if successful, inspires, startles, or coaxes us into knowing the world with revivified senses. You could say that Ecopoetics, the book, is basically about the complex relationship between word and world. But you could say that I've always been attracted to both words and the world of which they're a part. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I've been both outdoorsy and bookish, so you could say this is just kind of a culmination of that. And the main poets I look at are Wallace Stevens, Elizabeth Bishop, Richard Wilbur, and Sylvia Plath. And I look at a few others in my introduction and conclusion. But these poets, for me, really demonstrate what I like to call sensuous poesis, but they don't apologize for the artifice of language, and poetry for me, and for many writers and poets, is the most deliberately and self-consciously artificial form of language. The very word poesis from the Greek means made thing, so that emphasis on human creation, forming language a particular way, the way someone would manipulate paint on a canvas, manipulating words in the page. And traditionally, nature writing has often been treated as a kind of a mirror held up to nature, as the traditional metaphor for language, or maybe more accurately, a window. Language should be, in the minds of traditional nature writers, transparent and most realistically as possible give us the natural world. And for me, these poets that I'm interested in don't think about language that way. They think about language as itself being rather wild and not just passively giving us the world, but recreating the world, perhaps performing the world on the page. So sensuous poesis for me, and this is a phrase I came up with to describe this thing that I saw. However different and distinct these poets are from each other, they had this in common. And that is treating language as, again, wild, and as performing and enacting, not just representing the non-human world. So, in other words, using formal devices like sound effects, stanza shape, figurative language like metaphors and similes, to perform the wildness of the natural world rather than passively reflect it. So I'll read you this brief poem by Emily Dickinson and just say a few words about what I think she's doing in this poem. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sidewise to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, too silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. So what I see Dickinson doing in this poem partly is moving from describing the bird in these visual terms, and really appealing to our sight, our sense of sight, mostly, and shifting towards the end of the poem to our ears, and appealing more to the ear, not exclusively, but moving kind of from the eye to the ear in the very sounds of the words. And so at the beginning you have this bird that's domesticated. You have the speaker of the poem attempting to kind of domesticate this wild animal through figurative language like his eyes were like frightened beads, and he stirred his velvet head. So these kind of domesticating metaphors, and personifying the bird as acting kind of gentlemanly and hopping sidewise to let the beetle pass. These ways to, again, to kind of describe the bird in human terms. And then there's this crucial moment in the middle of the poem where there's this grammatical ambiguity where it says, like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb. And before you get to that I, that phrase, like one in danger, cautious, appears to describe the bird, who has been described as timid and fidgety up till then. But it turns out grammatically that's referring to I, the speaker of the poem, and that, I think, very purposeful and crucial grammatical ambiguity draws the speaker and the bird together in the poem. But right at that moment, right after that moment, the bird unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home, the poem says, and therefore there's literal gap between the bird and the speaker opens up. So at the moment of closeness between the speaker and the bird comes a radical distinctness between the two. And we get extravagant figurative language at the end. He unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home, so there's that kind of that boat imagery. Softer than oars divide the ocean, too silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. So this really strange progression of figurative language from this kind of boat imagery to the bird like a butterfly leaping off banks of noon, so place and time get kind of mixed up there. And these butterflies swimming through time, really kind of abstract and strange figurative language to describe the bird flying away. But for me, that's really important because it's showing the speaker letting go of the bird and saying that bird is very wild, and no matter how close I got to it in the poem, it's always going to be different from me and distinct from me. And so the very sounds of the words at the end there, as well as the extravagant figurative language, enact and perform that radical difference between the two. So for me, Emily Dickinson and the other poets in this book, they operate from that assumption that language paradoxically unites us to the world and connects us to the natural world and demonstrates our difference from it, that we're simultaneously distinct from the rest of nature and inseparable from it. Any poet, if he or she is worth their salt, will remind us readers that language is not something to be taken for granted, that language isn't just a tool, that we shouldn't think of language merely in a utilitarian way as a means to an end. Sometimes language has to be used that way, like a textbook manual or the operating instructions for a dishwasher, right? They have to be very clear and tell you how to do something, get something done. But for poets, of course, language isn't just utilitarian. It operates by its own kind of wild rules, so to speak, and for these poets in particular, they force us to take the power of language seriously and to remember that we use language to express thoughts that we have before we utter a phrase or write down a phrase, but also language has that mysterious power to direct thought. So both happen. And language is, again, as wild as nature. Even though it's distinct from it, it's also rather wild.